Hare Krishna. In today's video, I'll be talking about something which is universal for all spiritual seekers. I myself is also a seeker, and I've spoken to many seekers, and I understand this is kind of a very common seeking among almost all spiritual seekers. It's the ground state. Everybody is seeking to realize their true self, because trying to find out who am I, or trying to realize the true self, some call it self, some call it Brahman, some call it Paramatman, whatever may be the name, but it is the same thing. There is one chapter in Bhagavat Gita which extensively deals with it, and it's very dear to me. There are many chapters which cover this, but one specific chapter, it's called chapter 13, and that talks about Khetra Khetragya Yoga, the knower and the known. This particular chapter talks about this in extensive details and so simple and so beautifully that I felt I must share this with all of you. So it says there are three basic entities in reality. So one is Brahman, or which we call Paramatman or Param Purusha. There is individual soul and there is nature. At the highest state, we know everything is Brahman. There is just one reality. But that one reality represents itself as the nature. It says Prakriti, Purusha, and Purushottama. Prakriti is the nature, which is made up of all elements, that earth, air, water, fire, and space. Those are five basic elements. The mind, intelligence, and ego, all the sense organs, the organs of perception, the organs of function, and the root matter from which all the elements come into existence. That everything that we can perceive is nature. Then there is Purusha, or the individual soul, which is bound. And then there is Purushottama, or the divine, or true self, or a Paramatman that dwells in the heart of everybody. And once the soul realizes its oneness with the true self, the soul is released from ignorance and there is a liberation. This is called enlightenment, it's called liberation, it's called self-realization. There are many names to it. It realizes its true nature as immortal and truth, consciousness, and bliss. It realizes its own nature as blissful, conscious, and everlasting and immortal. And it becomes free from bondage, free from suffering. But the point comes, why the soul, first of all, gets attached to nature. Because in chapter 13, Lord says the soul takes body and goes through a cycle of birth and death. But why? The question arises, the why the soul gets attached to nature and takes body again and again. And the answer to this is very simple. Since soul is the eternal portion of the Lord is all blissful, the divine is all blissful, and its basic nature is bliss. Once it gets detached from the Lord, it forgets itself. It thinks that the happiness or the bliss or joy of life lies in the nature. So nature operates in three modes. We know it is tamas, it rajas, and sattva. Tamas is what we enjoy out of food, out of sex, out of sleep, All this gives us some level of pleasure or happiness. Then there is rajasic happiness, which comes out of doing things, greatness. Somebody wants to become a famous person, rich person, conquer the world, do great things. And then comes happiness out of sattva, which comes out of knowledge, acquiring knowledge, meditation, silencing one's mind, all this, or learning scriptures, worshipping deities, all the kind of uh, giving charity, all kinds of doing selfless service. This is all sattvic. So all three things in nature gives us happiness. So the soul, forgetting that its own nature is blissful, it doesn't have to get attached to nature to derive happiness. It gets attached to the nature and takes bodies after bodies after bodies after bodies and goes through a cycle of birth and death. And sometimes, due to its good deeds, or due to selfless service, due to devotion, due to grace of God, something within its heart awakens. And then it turns inward instead of the mind turning outward, where it thinks that the source of happiness is nature. It turns inward and starts meditating. On meditation, once it realizes that there is a joy that comes from within, and it has nothing to do with outside, it's nothing to do with nature. It starts going inward, and a time comes when the soul realizes its oneness with the true self, or with Brahman, or with Atman, which dwells within the heart of each and every being. And once that union is established, its ignorance is lost, because it realizes that its own nature, very nature, is blissful. It doesn't have to run after happiness outside. And when that realization comes that it is immortal, it doesn't have to fear death, and it is all blissful. It becomes free of fear of death. It stops changing the nature for its happiness, and the soul realizes it is one with Brahman, or inner and outer has become one. And in that state, it realizes its true nature, which is immortal, all blissful, and everlasting. And with that, it comes out of suffering. This is called liberation, this is called enlightenment. And how to practice meditation? Now you will ask, what exactly are the techniques of practicing meditation? Who can meditate? It says there are various things one can do to realize one's true self, but it recommends meditation as one of the most powerful techniques. And Lord in chapter 6 of Bhagabat Gita gives all the techniques of meditation, which is very, very simple. Only in 2 verses, Lord explains the technique of meditation. In 1 verse, he says who is that qualifies to meditate. And then in 4 verses, he gives the milestones and ultimate realization of self. So in 7 to 8 verses, Lord explains all the mysteries about meditation, its process, its steps, its milestones. I had one video in which I spoke about it, but here I'll just repeat. Lord says anybody who is leading a moderate life, moderate in sleep, moderate in food, and moderate in action, work, is eligible to meditate. People who have extreme lifestyles, people who sleep a lot, or people who work a lot, or people who enjoy and entertain a lot, any extremes is not ideal for a meditator. One who leads a moderate life, moderate food, moderate entertainment, moderate sleep, moderate work, a life of moderation is eligible. And then he says, what is the technique of meditation? He says that just close your eyes, sit in a silent place, and focus your attention on your true self, on your own self, the feeling of I am. Just stay there. When the mind moves away, because thought comes and tracks the mind away, just bring it back. Mind goes away, bring it back. Just keep practicing it. And as you go on developing with practice, as the mind becomes more and more trained, the mind will start residing in the heart. It will move less, and a time comes when the mind completely becomes still in the heart. That is called the ideal state. It happens by practice. The technique is simple, but with practice one becomes more and more perfect. And then what are the milestones? He says, as the mind becomes more and more still, you'll start experiencing greater and greater joy within your heart. And a time comes when the joy becomes very, very intense. And ultimately, one realizes that the whole creation is within oneself, and one's true self is in the creation. So inner and outer becomes one. So it realizes oneness of existence. So that is pure bliss, state of pure peace. And that is when one transcends all the boundaries. One realizes that one's own consciousness, the true consciousness, is no more confined to the limit of one's body. It spreads through the entire universe. And that is the final state. And that is called state of enlightenment. So these are few very simple techniques that Lord has spoken. There is also chapter 15 where he's talking about Brahman. He's saying the Brahman is all pervading. It is within, it's without. And by its command, the nature works. So the nature doesn't act according to the wish of the soul. It acts as per the command of the Lord. So that is why it says for liberation, one requires the grace of the Lord. And where is Lord? Lord dwells in the heart of everybody as his own Atman, or his true self. So by devotion, by meditation on the true self, one experiences the true joy, true bliss dwells within one's heart. It's not outside. Let me try to make certain things a little bit clearer, because sometimes people think that, oh, for meditation and this and that, I need to renounce my home. And Lord says no to that. Lord says detachment, but not sannyas. Don't run away from home. Live in this world, do your work, live a life of moderation, and practice meditation, practice devotion. Don't run away from the home. That's not the solution. And he clearly says no to that. Another thing he has said, don't try to torture yourself. It's completely wrong. He says that one should try to lead a life of moderation. Do not torture oneself. Don't run away from home. Leading a life of moderation and practicing discipline, practicing meditation, and trying to devote one's life for the realization of self. Living in this world, one can realize liberation, one can realize enlightenment. So that's the teaching of Bhagavad Gita. And I hope this will help. By no means I am not enlightened myself. I am on the journey, and it's tough. Self-discipline is very hard. By no means. You think that you have disciplined some aspect of your life, and then all of a sudden you realize that everything falls apart. I go through it again and again and again, many times in my life. Howsoever hard you try, overcoming one's nature is very, very hard. It's only by the grace of Lord one can overcome one's own weaknesses, and by the grace of God one can realize the true self, and one can be free from the cycle of birth and death. Thank you all. Hare Krishna. I hope it helps, my friends.